My son and I did not speak for 2 years, and it ended because I drove 2 hours to Portland and said one sentence on his front step. I'm Walter, 82, retired carpenter, 9 years on my own since I lost my Helen. If there's somebody you haven't spoken to and you've stopped being able to remember exactly why, this one is for you. Start with number 1 and stay for number 4 because that's the sentence. Number 1. It started over an addition on a house, which is to say it did not start over an addition on a house at all. This was 1999. David was 31. He's 58 now, an engineer down in Portland. And back then he'd a young family and a small place, and they wanted another room on the back of it, and he hired a contractor. I found out from Helen, who'd found out from David's wife, and I want you to understand what that was in my house. I'd been a carpenter 38 years at that point. I'd built the house I'm sitting in. I'd put up 60-odd others in this county, and my son put an addition on his own house and never asked me. I rang him about it, and I'd like to tell you I was reasonable, and I was not. I've never been a shouter, but there's a particular cold voice a man of my sort uses, and I used it. And he said something like, "Pop, you're 2 hours away and you're busy," which was true, and which was also not the reason. And both of us knew it, and neither of us said so. That was the surface of it. And the surface is nearly always something you could describe to a stranger in one sentence. And it is nearly always not the thing. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number two. The whole of it took about 4 minutes, and I can give you every word. But first the thing underneath the addition, because it took me a decade to see it. My son had spent 31 years watching his father be too busy and had made a decision about it, and the decision was to stop asking. This was some weeks later. He'd come up to see his mother, which he did regularly, and I was in the shop, and he came out to say he was going. And I said something about the addition. I'd not left it alone. I'd been chewing on it for a month, and I brought it up in the shop with a plane in my hand. And he stood in that doorway and he said, "I didn't ask you because you'd have said no." And I said, "I would not have said no." And he said, quite quietly, "You said no to the graduation." Now I have talked about the graduation on this channel before. David finished at the university in Orono in 1989, and I did not go. I told everybody it was the job, and there was a real job and a real deadline, and that was not the reason. The reason was that I was afraid of the emotion of it, of a room full of people, of not knowing how to be proud out loud. I had never told a living soul that, not Helen, and I certainly had not told my son. So there I was in my own shop 10 years on, and a boy of 31 had just put his finger on the exact spot. And what I said, and I'd give a good deal not to have said it, and I've had 25 years to think about it, what I said was, "You've done all right without me." That's the line. 6 words. And he looked at me for a moment and he said, "That's right." And he went out to his truck and drove to Portland, and that was 2 years. I want to say what that sentence of mine actually was because I've had a long while to work it out, and I think there are men listening who have said their own version of it. It was not an insult. I was not trying to wound him. It was a man who had just been seen and could not stand it, reaching for the nearest thing that would end the conversation. That's all it was. 4 minutes, and I chose the fastest available exit, and the exit cost me 2 years of my son's life. And I'd want to name the mechanism properly because I've seen it in other men since, and none of them could see it in themselves. When somebody who loves you tells you a true thing about yourself, there are 2 things you can do in the following second. You can stand there and take it, which is dreadful. I want to be honest, it is genuinely dreadful, and it lasts about 1.5 minutes and then it's over. Or you can say something that makes them stop. The second one is quicker. It works instantly. It is, in the moment, an enormous relief, and every man of my formation has been trained his whole life to reach for it. And what nobody tells you is the price, because the price does not arrive for years, and when it arrives, it does not have a label on it. 2 years. That was the bill for a minute and a half I couldn't stand. There's a detail in that shop doorway I've only understood lately. He'd rehearsed it, I'm nearly certain. The way he said the thing about the graduation, quietly and not as an accusation, and with about 10 years of consideration in it. That was not a man losing his temper. That was a son who had been carrying something since 1989 and had finally worked up to saying it to his father's face. 31 years old, and he'd driven 2 hours up from Portland and gone out to a workshop to say it. And it took me 4 minutes to teach him never to try that again. That's the part I'd not forgiven another man, and I've had to find a way to live within myself. He came to me with the hardest thing he had, and I did not give him 1 second of it. Now, I'd say to any father listening who is in the middle of something like that, or who can feel one coming, when your son says the true thing, the whole of the job is to say nothing for about 5 seconds. That's it. That's the entire technique, and I did not have it at 55. Not agree, not explain, not defend. 5 seconds of a closed mouth, and then something along the lines of, I'll have to think about that. Because what happens in those 5 seconds is that the reaching for the exit passes. It's a wave and it has a length to it. If you can stand still while it goes past, you come out the other side and the conversation is still available. If you speak inside the first 2 seconds, you will say the exit line, whatever your version of it is, and you will not be able to take it back, and it will not sound to him the way it sounds to you. I have used those 5 seconds since, not always, but I used them with my daughter about 6 years ago when she said something to me about how I was managing after Helen died. And it was true, and I did not like it. And I stood in this kitchen and said nothing at all for what felt like an hour. Then I said, I'll have to think about that. And she said, all right, Pop. And we went on, and there was no 2 years. Before the next one, tell me in the comments how long it's been for you and whether you've said anything yet. Just that much, if that's all you want to put. I'd guess there are more of us in that position than anybody would think, and it might do somebody good tonight to see they're not the only one. I read every single comment, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. And if this is helping you, that thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to somebody else who needed it. Number 3, nobody declares an estrangement. That's what nobody tells you, and it's why they last as long as they do. There was no announcement. Nobody said, right, we're not speaking. There was a bad 4 minutes in a workshop, and then he went home, and then it was a week, and a week is nothing. Men don't ring each other every week. Then it was a month, and a month was still explicable. And somewhere around 3 months, it stopped being a gap and became a condition. And neither of us had done one single thing to make that happen, except not pick up a telephone. That's the mechanics of it, and I'd want everybody to hear it plainly. It is not maintained by anger. Mine had gone off the boil inside of about 6 weeks. I was not angry at my son by the autumn of 1999. I doubt he was much angry at me. It is maintained by the fact that not calling is easier than calling every single day, and that the longer it goes, the harder the call becomes, so the ease compounds. And there's a thing underneath that which I'd offer to anybody, because a man wrote to me about the 5 seconds and said he'd tried it and couldn't manage it. It's easier if you know your own exit line. Every man has got one. It's the sentence he reaches for when he's cornered, and it's generally the same sentence every time, and he's said it to 3 or 4 people over the course of a life. Mine is a version of "you don't need me." It came out at my son in 1999 as "you've done all right without me," and I've caught it forming since. At my daughter once, and at Helen at least twice in 1985 when things were bad. Always the same shape. When somebody gets close enough to see me, I tell them they don't need me, and then I've made it their fault for coming near. Once I knew that, I could hear it starting. That's the whole use of it. It doesn't stop the wave. It means I can feel the words assembling, and I've got about 2 seconds warning, and 2 seconds is enough to shut my mouth. Work out what yours is. Go back over the 2 or 3 worst conversations of your life and find the sentence you reach for. It'll be there, and it's probably the same one every time. And once you've named it, it loses about half its power. By the second year, ringing my own son had become an enormous thing to do. In the first month, it would have taken 4 seconds. That's what time does to it, and time is doing it right now to somebody listening. Now, Helen. She saw him all through it. She'd drive down to Portland, or he'd come up when I was out on a job, and I knew it, and she knew I knew it, and we did not have a great deal to say about it. And here is the thing I have thought about more than almost anything in this story. She did not fix it. She could have. She was better with people than I have ever been, and she had both of us, and she could have sat us down at that kitchen table any Sunday she liked. She wouldn't do it. I asked her once, in about the second year, something along the lines of, couldn't she say something to him? And she looked at me the way she looked at me when I'd said something not worthy of me. And she said, he's not going to come first. That was it. 6 words back at me. And what she meant, and she was not going to explain it, she never explained anything, was that I was the father, and I was 56, and he was 32. And there is an order to these things, and the older man goes first. I did not want to hear it. I heard it anyway. And it took me another 8 or 10 months. And then I got in the truck. I'd say to any wife or any daughter who is in the middle of 2 men who've stopped speaking, you are not obliged to carry it. You may well be the only one who could, and it will still be the wrong thing to do, because a repair that a woman carries between 2 men is not a repair. It's a message service, and it holds forever, and neither of them has done anything. Helen let me sit in it. It was the kindest thing she did for me in 54 years, and it took me about a decade to understand it. Now I want to describe what those 2 years were actually like, because I've made them sound like a gap, and they were not a gap. They were furnished. Every Sunday I knew he was not going to ring, and every Sunday some part of me registered that he had not. Christmas 1999, he came to this house. That surprised people when I've mentioned it. Everybody assumes an estrangement means somebody doesn't come at Christmas. He came for his mother, and he was perfectly civil to me, and I was perfectly civil to him, and we passed things at that table and said thank you. And the whole day was got through by 2 grown men being courteous in a room with about 9 other people in it. That is worse than not coming. I want to say that plainly for anybody who's got one of those coming up. Being in a room with somebody you're not speaking to, and both of you performing normality for the sake of a woman at the end of the table, that is the hardest 4 hours I have spent in this house, and there was no crisis, and nobody raised their voice, and it looked from outside like a family Christmas. Helen knew. She watched the whole of it and said nothing and did the washing up. The second Christmas, he did not come. They went to Karen's people, and I've never been certain whether that was a decision or a rota, and I did not ask. And I did not ask because I did not want the answer. Now here's the thing I most want anybody to take from number 3, and it is the reason 2 years is a common length and 1 month is not. The story changes. That's what happens in there. In the first month, I knew exactly what I'd done. I had a clear, uncomfortable, entirely accurate account of a workshop in September and 6 words I'd chosen. By the second year, I had a much better story. By the second year, it was, we've drifted. It was, he's got a young family and a career and he's busy. It was, he knows where I am. It was, on the worst days, he's the one who walked out to that truck. Not 1 word of that was a lie exactly. That's what makes it so dangerous. Every sentence in the improved version was defensible. And all of it together amounted to a man who had quietly stopped being the one who did something wrong. I did not decide to do that. Nobody sits down and revises. But 2 years of not calling requires a reason, and a man will manufacture one at about the rate he needs it. And the manufacturing happens somewhere behind where you can see. So if you are 2 years into something and you're fairly sure it's 50-50, I'd ask you to consider whether it was 50-50 in the first month. That's the only test I've got, and it's a good one. Go back to the first month. What did you think then, before the account got improved? Because the first month version is nearly always the true one. It's the only one that was written before you needed it to say something particular. Mine in the first month was, I said something cruel to my son in my own shop because he told me the truth about 1989. That's what it was. And by month 22, it had become a drift between two busy men, and I'd have given you that version at the diner with a straight face. There's one more thing about the 2 years, and it's the practical bit, so I'll give it plainly. The longer it goes, the more the thing you'd have to overcome changes. In the first month, I'd have had to overcome embarrassment. That's all. Ring him up, feel a fool for 90 seconds, and it's done. At 6 months, I'd have had to overcome embarrassment plus explaining the 6 months. At 2 years, I had to overcome embarrassment and explaining the 2 years, and the fact that I'd let a grandson go from 2 to 4, and the story I'd built about how it was mutual, and the enormous weight of having become a man who doesn't ring his son. Same phone, completely different call. That is the compound interest on this, and nobody tells you the rate. Every month you wait, the thing you'd have to be brave about gets bigger, and your capacity for it does not. Which is why the answer, whatever your situation, is always today rather than a better day. There is no better day. There is only a cheaper day, and today is the cheapest one left. I'd have found that hard to hear at 56, and I'm saying it anyway, because somebody listening is at 4 months and telling themselves they'll do it after Christmas. After Christmas costs more. It always does. That's the only arithmetic in this whole talk that I'd stake anything on. We're one away from the one I promised you. Number 4, the sentence. Stay with me. Number 4. I drove to Portland on a Tuesday in the spring of 2001 without ringing first, and I stood on his step and said one sentence. I want to give you the whole of that day because the sentence is not much use without it. I did not plan it. That's the first thing. I had not written anything down, and I had not rehearsed, and I was 57 years old, and I got in that truck at about 9:30 in the morning with no idea what I was going to say when I got there. 2 hours down Route 1 and then the interstate. And I'd like to tell you I spent that drive composing something, and I did not. I spent most of it thinking about turning round, and I very nearly did at Brunswick. And the only reason I didn't is that I'd have had to explain to Helen why I came home early. That's the truth of it. Pride got me down there. The same thing that caused the whole business got me into the truck. I parked outside his house and sat there about 10 minutes. And here's what I'd say to anybody who's got that drive ahead of them. Do not wait until you know what to say. You will not know. I sat outside my son's house at 57 years of age with nothing prepared. And the whole of my working life was about preparation, and there was nothing to prepare. I went up and knocked. He opened the door, and he had a dish towel in his hand, and he did not say anything at all. He just stood there, and I could see him working out whether something had happened to his mother. And what came out of my mouth was, I've not done all right without you. That's it. That's the sentence. 6 words to answer the 6 words I'd said in that shop. And I'd not planned it, and I had not thought of it in the truck, and I could not tell you today where it came from. He stood there a moment, and then he said, "Come in, Pop." And that was the whole of the reconciliation. We did not have a conversation about the 2 years. We did not discuss the addition. I've never seen that addition to this day, 25 years on, and I've never asked to. We sat in his kitchen for about 2 hours and talked about his work and his boy, and I met a grandson who had gone from 2 to 4 while I was being proud. And at about 4 in the afternoon, I drove home. Now, why that sentence and not another one? Because I've thought about this a great deal since. It worked because it was an admission and not an apology. That's the distinction I'd most want to leave anybody with tonight. I did not say I'm sorry. I want to be honest about that. I don't believe I said sorry to my son for another 15 years. And when I finally did, it was about the graduation, and it was a different conversation altogether on a porch in about 2018. Sorry is a thing you say to close an account. It asks for something. It asks to be received and accepted and to have the matter set down. A man says sorry and then he waits, and the other fellow has to do something with it. I've not done all right without you ask for nothing. It's a statement about the condition of the man saying it. There's no reply required. There's nothing to accept or refuse. And that's precisely why it went through, because a sentence that asks for nothing cannot be turned down. There's a second reason, and it's the harder one. It was true, and it cost me something to say. 2 years I'd been telling everybody, including myself, that I was fine. And what I did on that step was hand my son the one piece of information I had spent 2 years concealing, which is that his father had been diminished by his absence. That's the currency, not the words. Nobody remembers the words. It's that a proud man came 2 hours to say a thing that made him smaller, and the son could see the cost of it standing there in his own doorway with a dish towel in his hand. You cannot fake that, which is why I'd tell anybody not to bother polishing the sentence. Find the true thing that cost you something and say that. It'll come out badly. Mine came out badly. I've made it sound clean tonight, and I promise you I did not sound clean. I sounded like a man who had not slept. Badly is fine. Badly is better, I think. He could hear that it cost me. Now, I have to say the honest part here, and it belongs in the middle of this item rather than tacked on the end, because I'd not want anybody to take the rest of it wrong. Sometimes they don't open the door. I got lucky. I want that said plainly. I drove down there and my son opened the door and said, "Come in, Pop." And there is a version of that Tuesday where he did not, and I've thought about it since. He might have said, "Not today." He'd have been entitled. 2 years is a long time, and I was the one who let it run, and he had a young family and a life and no obligation whatever to receive his father, because his father had finally got round to it. And if that had happened, the sentence would still have been the right thing to say. That's the part I'd want anybody to have. You do not go for the result. If you go for the result, you'll spend the drive rehearsing and you'll say the polished thing, and you'll be watching their face for a return. And they will feel that, and it will not work. You go because it's true and because it's yours to say. What they do with it is theirs. And there's a harder version of this that I have to say because I know who's listening. Sometimes the child is right to stay away. I've had letters. Some of them are from men in my position who said a foolish thing in a workshop and have not been able to fix it. And I understand those completely, and I have written back to a good many of them. And some of them are from men who do not know why their children have gone and have never asked and are looking for a sentence that will bring them back. There isn't one. I want to be plain about that because I'd be doing harm otherwise. If you genuinely do not know why somebody stopped speaking to you, the thing you need is not a sentence. It's an answer, and the only place to get it is from them. And the question is not, when are you coming back? It's what did I do? And you have to be prepared for the answer, which some men are not, and that's generally the whole of why they haven't asked. I knew exactly what I'd done. Every day of those 2 years I knew. That's the only reason 6 words worked. They landed on a thing my son and I both already understood, and I was not asking him to explain anything or forgive anything. I was telling him I'd finally stopped pretending. If you're not in that position, don't drive anywhere yet. Find out what happened first. And if somebody has told you why and you've decided they're wrong about it, then that's not an estrangement you can fix with a sentence either. And I'd not pretend to know what to do about it. And I'm a carpenter and not the man to be advising anybody on the deep business of a family. Now the last piece of number 4, and it's about what happens after the door opens, because nobody talks about that part either. It is not a conversation. I had it in my head driving down that if he let me in, there'd be some sort of reckoning, that we'd sit at a table and go through it and get to the bottom of the graduation in 1999 and the whole of it. We did not do any of that. We talked about a bridge job he was working on and about his boys starting school. 2 hours of ordinary talk between a father and a son, and not one word about the 2 years. I drove home half wondering whether anything had been fixed. It had. Everything had been fixed. It just did not look like fixing. It looked like 2 men talking about a bridge. And that's what I'd want anybody to expect, because if you're waiting for the reckoning, You may conclude it hasn't worked and go back to not ringing. The sentence is the door. What's on the other side of it is just ordinary life resumed. And ordinary life resumed is the entire prize. There is no ceremony. Nobody says, right, that's settled. You just start ringing each other again, and about 6 months later, you notice you've stopped counting. There's one more thing about that Tuesday I want to give you, and it's the part I've thought about most in 25 years. I nearly rang instead. That's the honest account. On the Monday night, I sat in this kitchen with the telephone in front of me for about half an hour, and I did not do it. And I told myself it was because I'd not know what to say. It wasn't that. It was that a telephone can be hung up. Some part of me knew, and I'd not have been able to say it at the time, that if I rang and he was cold with me, I'd have had my answer in about 9 seconds, and I'd never have tried again. A bad phone call at that stage would have finished it permanently because I'd have taken it as the verdict and gone quiet for good. Standing on a step is different. He'd have had to shut a door in my face. I'm not proud of that reasoning. It is, if you look at it squarely, a man arranging things so that it's harder for his son to refuse him. But I'd give it to anybody anyway, because it's true and because it works. Go in person if you possibly can, not because it's braver, because a telephone gives both of you an exit and a doorstep gives neither of you one. And in a situation that has been maintained for 2 years entirely by the availability of exits, removing them is the whole of the job. If you cannot go, if they're across the country, or if there's a reason, then write. A letter can't be hung up either. It sits on a table and gets read, possibly not the first day, and it doesn't require anybody to produce a response in real time in front of you. The telephone is the worst of the three for this particular job, and it's the one everybody reaches for first. And I'd add, do not tell them you're coming. I've thought about that a good deal, and I'm fairly certain it mattered. If I'd rung and said I'm driving down Tuesday, then Tuesday becomes an appointment. He'd have had 4 days to work out what he thought about it, and I'd have had 4 days to prepare a speech, and we'd both have arrived polished and defended, and it would have been a considerably worse afternoon. Instead, there was a man at the door with no warning and no speech, and it was ordinary, and ordinary is what you want. The whole business went right precisely because neither of us had time to get ready for it. That's about the most useful thing I know about repairing anything, and it is the opposite of how I've done everything else in my life. I'm a carpenter. I measure and I plan and I prepare, and it has served me for 65 years. It's no use whatever for this. This wants a man turning up unready and saying the true thing badly, and the more prepared you are, the less it works. I did not know that in 2001. I got it right by accident because I was too proud to turn around at Brunswick. I've had a good deal of luck in my life, and that's near the top of the list. And I'd say the last practical thing about the sentence itself, since the title promised you one, and I don't want anybody writing it down as a formula. Mine worked because it answered his. He'd been carrying "you've done all right" without me for 2 years, and I gave him back the same 6 words turned over. Yours will be different because your 6 words were different. Go back and find what you actually said, not what you meant, what came out of your mouth. That's what he's been holding word for word, and I promise you he can still quote it. Then say the true opposite of it. That's the whole method, and it's not much of one, and it took me 2 years and 2 hours of Route 1 to arrive at it. Number 5, I have not got the 2 years back, and I've stopped expecting to. That's the last one, and it's the one nobody tells you about reconciliation. You do not get restored. There is no version of this where you drive home from Portland and the 2 years fold up and disappear. David Jr. went from 2 to 4. I was not there for any of it, and there are photographs in that house of a small boy at 3 years old, and I was not in a single one of them, and I have looked at them. And I'll tell you a harder one. My son learned something about me in those 2 years that he could not unlearn afterward, which is that his father would let it run. That's the damage, not the missed birthdays. It's that he found out I was a man who could go 2 years, and no amount of Sunday telephone calls since has entirely removed the information. I know it's still in there because of how careful he is with me. He is very careful with me, my son. He always leaves me a way to say no. He suggests things rather than asking them. He is at 58 years of age, still slightly managing his father, and I understand exactly why. And it started in a workshop in 1999. So what did I actually get? I got 25 more years, which is not nothing. It is, in fact, the whole of the rest of my life. I got a man at his mother's funeral in October of 2017 who stood next to me and did not leave my side for 4 days. And I got the thing that most of you already know about if you've listened to me before. He rings me every Sunday. That started a few weeks after Helen died. Nobody arranged it. He simply began, and he has not missed one in 9 years. And there have been Sundays when he has rung me from a car park because he was traveling and there was no other window in the day. I have never once asked him to do that. We have never discussed it. And I know, because I know my son, and because I know what he learned about me in 1999, I know that some part of why he does it is that he found out once that this family can go quiet, and he has decided that it will not happen again on his watch. That's what the 2 years bought in the end. A man who does not take the connection for granted because he's seen it break. I'd rather have had the 2 years. Let me be plain about that. If somebody offered me the choice, I'd take my grandson at 3, and I'd take my 32-year-old son, and I'd give back every bit of the wisdom. But that's not on offer. It never is. What's on offer is what you do next. And I did the thing on the step, and I got 25 years in a telephone call every Sunday for the rest of my life. Now, there's a piece of number 5 I've been putting off, and I'll say it, because it's the truest thing in the whole talk. Helen died 16 years after that Tuesday, and I have thought more than once about the version of my life where I did not get in the truck. In that version, my son comes to his mother's funeral in October of 2017 and stands somewhere near the back and is civil to me and goes home. In that version, I go into the worst year of my life with a son I haven't properly spoken to in 18 years. I do not believe I'd have come through it. I want to be exact. I'm not being dramatic, and I'm not fishing. I think about Frank, who lost his wife 4 years before I lost Helen, and who had nobody close enough by the end. And I think the difference between Frank and me is not character. It's about 4 telephone numbers. One of those numbers is my son's, and I very nearly did not have it. That's what a Tuesday in 2001 actually bought. Not 25 years of Christmases. It bought me the man who stood beside me for 4 days in October of 2017 and did not leave, and who has rung me every Sunday since, and who is the reason I am sitting here at 82 talking to you instead of being a story somebody tells about the fellow up the Hampton Road. You do not know what you're buying when you go. That's the thing. I thought I was going down there to fix an argument about an addition. I was, as it turns out, arranging who would be standing next to me on the worst day of my life, 16 years early. And I'd say this to anybody who's got a gap with somebody and is telling themselves there's time. You are not deciding about now. You're deciding about a day you can't see, which is coming, and on which you will very badly need whoever it is. And the arrangements for that day are being made right now by whether or not you pick up a telephone. I got that one right by about 8 months, and only because a woman I was married to said 6 words to me and would not carry my messages. There's one last thing, and then I'll wrap it up. I've never told David any of this. He does not know that I sat outside his house for 10 minutes. He does not know I nearly turned around at Brunswick. He certainly does not know what his mother said to me in the 2nd year, and she never told him either. I'd bet the house on that. And I've thought about whether to tell him. He's 58. There's time. I don't think I will. Not out of pride and not out of anything unresolved. I think it's that the man who came to the door with a dish towel got the version of it he needed, which was his father standing there having driven 2 hours. He doesn't need the accounting. He needs the Sundays, and he has them. But I've said it here, which means it exists somewhere outside of my own head, and there's a granddaughter of mine who watches these and who will hear it at some point. And if it gets back to him that way, then it gets back to him that way. That'll do. That's about as close as a man of my sort gets to telling his son he loves him, and I'd say the ratio's about right for the pair of us. So, 5 things. It started over an addition, which is to say, it did not. It ended in 4 minutes with 6 words I chose because I could not stand being seen. It lasted 2 years on nothing but the fact that not calling is easier than calling. It broke because a man of 57 drove 2 hours with nothing prepared and said the true thing that cost him, and it did not restore anything. It only bought what came after, which turned out to be the whole of the rest of my life. I'm 82 years old. It's Thursday evening and my son will ring me on Sunday, and he has rung me on Sunday for 9 years. There was a spring in 2001 when that was not going to happen, and the only reason it does is that an old fool got in a truck. 2 hours down, 6 words on a step, 25 years back. I'd have paid a great deal more than that, and I nearly paid nothing and got nothing. If you have got somebody, go. Don't write it out first. Don't wait until you know what to say. Drive there or ring and say the true thing badly. If tonight is one of the hard ones, if what's actually sitting on you is that there's nobody left to ring at all, then I made another talk about exactly that. About the 5 people I speak to every week and the 5 completely different jobs they do. It's right there on the screen. The kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.